Welcome to Spotlight in Schools. We focus on the Rochester City School District. I'm your host, Jim Strauss. The New York State Ed Department just released its 2016 test results for students in grades 3 through 8. Overall, the state has shown improvement in both English, language arts, and math. The news is not so good for Rochester. We rank last among the Big Five in New York. We have for years. Just 7.2% of Rochester students were judged proficient in math. 6.7% were judged proficient in English. The City School District replied to this news with a statement about new initiatives the district is undertaking to improve the performance of its students. One area that was not mentioned has been becoming a greater part of school practices in Rochester. It is known by several names: Restorative Initiatives, Restorative Practices, Restorative Justice. Whatever you call it, it shows promise in helping to change the culture and performance of the Rochester City Schools. My guest today has worked for many years in the area of restorative initiatives. I'm pleased to have Jeanne Carlivati of Partners in Restorative Initiatives on today's program. Welcome to Spotlight on Schools.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Okay. Can you give us a brief background of your career up to now?
Well, actually, I worked for the Rochester City School District for 28 years. I was a school counselor, and most of my career was in middle school by choice. I like those students in the middle. And so as a result, I'm very comfortable with conflict. I'm very comfortable with changing school culture, because in a middle school, those are, very important pieces. And so I kind of came to this work naturally. I've been retired since June of 2003. And that's when I found this organization, Partners in Restorative Initiatives. And at the time, they were actually just working in the criminal justice system, because restorative justice has its roots in criminal justice. And after a few years, I was thinking, oh, maybe this is not such a good volunteer situation for me. I need to, because it was a slow go in the criminal justice system. And this national trainer came to Rochester. Her name is Kay Pranis, and she's from Minnesota. And she came and did a 4-day circle training, peace circle training, and I took it. And at the end of the 4 days, I said, oh, this is about relationship building. I got this. It's the other piece of restorative practices. And that's when I went to our board and said, what would you think if we started doing work in school? Because that's...
Rochester City School Board?
No, our board from Partners in Restorative Initiatives. I said, what would you think, instead of just being in the criminal justice system trying to do this, that we start working in schools? So it's been 12 years now that we've been doing some schoolwork. The last few years, last year in particular, just blossoming in the Rochester City School District, which is where my heart is. So it feels great, and I'm really happy about that.
Okay. I went to the website of the International Institute for Restorative Practices. Yeah. It is www.iirp.org. It says this: in schools, the use of restorative practices has been shown to reliably reduce misbehavior, bullying, violence, and crime among students, and improve the overall climate for learning. In your experience, is that true?
Yes, absolutely. The history of IIRP, and by the way, they're housed in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, they began by running alternative high schools over 30 years ago, schools for young people who had been expelled and didn't have a place to be. Granted, the schools were small, not more than 75 students, but high support, lots and lots of support, but high accountability. And they were having a lot of success. Students were actually graduating, children who had been expelled from other places for all kinds of dastardly deeds, so to speak. And so after a few years of having this kind of success, they thought, well, if we can do it with the most challenging population of students and find success, why couldn't this work in public education? And that's when they started doing work in public schools as well. So this has been around, I'd say, since the mid-90s in this country in particular, but it comes from indigenous practice all over the world, really, of people coming together in circle, to hear their stories. The understanding is that well, we say this when we do trainings, an enemy is someone whose story we have not yet heard. Because the more we know about people, the less likely wrongdoing will occur. And if it does occur, because conflict is a way of life, I mean, we're not clones of each other, you know, we all have our different opinions. But when we come together in a respectful way and hear each other's stories and figure out what's happened and how we've affected others or we've been affected, it's much easier to repair the harm. So from the restorative justice point of view, which is why I think it works so beautifully in schools, we very rarely ask people how they've been affected by what's happened, and also we don't hold them accountable for repairing harm. We do things to them, which is the little punishing thing, or the, you know, suspension or in-school suspension. But we're never asked kids to own up to what they've done and repair it. And that's what restorative justice really focuses on. And restorative practices is the umbrella fitting in, like that 4-day training that I took, about building those strong relationships, building the culture of a school, giving people a chance to really get to know each other and laugh with each other and have fun with each other and build community with each other. And so when we can do that in school buildings and then hold each other accountable for wrongdoing, we really create cultures where children and staff both feel safe. They want to come to school. I mean, you can have the most amazing teacher in the world with the greatest lesson plans, but if there's chaos in the classroom, if children aren't respecting each other or respecting the teacher, and we know that that happens, the lesson plan goes out the window and a lot of learning doesn't take place. But when we can create spaces where children can feel safe and feel that they have a place to belong and are valued for being who they are, it's amazing to see how they really begin then tuning in to being students. And I do believe academics, you know, will improve. We had a 3-year project going at Monroe High School several years ago.
At the high school or when it was a middle school?
No, well, I worked in the middle school,
Yes.
and we did great things there, I have to say. But no, when one of our house administrators who worked at Monroe Middle School became the principal of Monroe High School, Vicki Ramos, one of the things she really wanted to do was build relationships. And she hired our organization to train her staff. And in 3 years, we trained all 160 of her staff members, but we also trained students. Unfortunately, Monroe was already a school under review. And at the end of the 3 years, student scores hadn't gone up very much.
Let's pause here. We're at the end of the first segment. I want to come back and talk about the code of conduct, which is one of the things that the Rochester City School District has implemented to try to address the very things you're talking about. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools. We're talking with Jeanne Carlivati of Partners in Restorative Initiatives. Before the break, I said I wanted to go talk about the Code of Conduct, which is an attempt to deal with some of the things we'd been talking about before the break. In an email conversation we had, you said that you were not directly involved with the development of the Rochester City School District's new Code of Conduct. By the way, you viewers can examine this document. It's long. But you can go to the district website. It's at rcsdk12.org. If you look at the bottom left of the homepage, at the quick links section, you can link to it. On page 59 and 60 of that document is a discussion of restorative approaches. And we looked at this before the show, and it very much reflects your ideas. In it, it documents 4 types of restorative practices that it uses, and this mirrors the kinds of things that you've been doing. They are the circle process, collaborative negotiation, peer mediation, and formal restorative conference. Let's talk with the first one. You've done a lot of work with this. They call it the circle process. You call it something else. Can you talk about that?
No, actually, peace circles we use all the time for relationship building.
Peace circles.
Peace circles. where you use a talking piece, and whoever has the talking piece is invited to speak. Everyone else is invited to listen. So it's, no one is interrupting each other, but we use it. Actually, this comes from IIRP, that 80% of the time circles should be used for relationship building and having fun, 20% for conflict. But certainly if you have established the use of circles within your building, if something goes wrong, you immediately circle up and you use the restorative questions. And the restorative questions are used through the whole process. And they basically are, what happened from your point of view, or what's been happening. We never ask why. Why gets people defensive, but the what allows for the storytelling, because this is all about people telling their own stories. The second question is always, how have you been affected and in what ways, and who else has been affected by what's happened? And the third basic question is, what needs to happen now to repair the harm that's been done to the greatest degree possible? In the restorative world, it's not about breaking rules, it's about breaking relationships. So if you form a relationship with someone, that's your classroom teacher, let's say, and you break a rule, then you've broken that relationship. So so you would circle up and ask those restorative questions with everyone having equal voice. And that's another really important thing. It's not one person telling another person what to do. So the circle process can be used for having those fun and making those connections, but it can also be circles of understanding, so we understand what rules are for. It can be healing circles, support circles, celebration circles, circles of appreciation, welcoming circles if you have a new student. In one of our schools, I love it, when the kids have a birthday, this is in an elementary school, of course, they do a circle of appreciation where each person says something that they appreciate about the student, and the teacher writes it all and sends it home with the student. So, circles can be used for so many collaborative things, along with conflict and wrongdoing. So when you're used to using circles, you're very used to using them for all kinds of things. The next piece on that, which is they call collaborative.
Actually, before we go to
Yes.
that, the training for the circle, the peace circles, how do you conduct the training for it?
In circle, pretty much, because we want people to experience what it's like to be in a circle. We call it the power of the circle. And so a lot of it is done in circle, with people sharing their own stories. Like in an introductory training, in many of the trainings, of course, do have teachers in it, or administrators. And so it's always, talk a little bit about who you are, where you work, what you do, but also what was your path that brought you into education. And so that's the way that we begin. And then always a second round for people to make connections with things that people have said. So
Positive? Is this, are we still in the prevention part, or are we in the
well, because you
intervention part?
have to learn how to use the circle for relationships before you can do it for wrongdoing. So when we do the initial training, we want them to learn how to be in circle with each other and share about themselves and build those relationships. The more you can experience circles, then you understand the power of it. But then we do training on how to use the circle process for conflict, and it can be conflict within a classroom. Sometimes I like to say the waters are muddy and we don't really know what's going on. But with everyone together, and we use that collective wisdom, we can figure it out. And so not only do we figure out what's been happening, how people have been affected, how things can be, what suggestions they have for repairing, then we'll usually do a fourth round, what are you personally willing to do? So we hold everyone accountable for repairing what's been happening in the classroom. But then when there are, I noticed on that list, your last thing there is formal restorative conferences. That's when there's really significant harm done, and maybe there's a true victim, a true offender, or as we like to say, the author of the act and the receiver of the act. You know, people don't like to be called victims and offenders necessarily, but someone has caused the harm, someone is, and it could be more than one someone who's receiving the harm. You really then want to put everyone involved, including members of the school community, in that circle, because it's the understanding that when harm occurs, it doesn't just affect the receiver and the author. It affects their families, it affects members of the school community. So you want to broaden that circle so that everyone has a chance also to talk about what's been happening and how it's been affecting them. So we can use circles for simple little things, even like, let's say, you know, I'm making this up. You have a rule in your class, you're the teacher, you can't get up and sharpen your pencil while you're giving instruction, but I do it. So before the class is over, the teacher's gonna say to me, Jeannie, what was going on today when you got up to sharpen your pencil? And either I give her an answer, or I say, I don't know. Well, I'm going to tell you, you know, how it affected me. I worked hard on that lesson, and when you got up to sharpen your pencil, it got everyone off task. So what are you going to do tomorrow so I know that this isn't going to happen again? So you're all, even for those simple little things, you can have those quick little restorative conversations. Or when it's more serious, you can do it with a whole group of people or just the people who are primarily involved, but always asking those restorative questions.
So when you have it with a smaller group, it approaches, I think, the second one, collaborative.
Yes, which we call restorative conversations, which are just quick, much quicker, like I just showed you as the example with the teacher and the student in class. You don't need a lot of other people involved. Those can just be those quick little interactions that we have with each other on a daily basis.
Okay, we talked about the peace circle. That's the first of the four restorative practices. We'll come back. We'll talk about collaborative negotiation, peer mediation, and formal restorative conference. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools. We're talking with Jeanne Carlivati of Partners in Restorative Initiatives. We've talked about the 4 types of restorative practices. In the last segment, we talked about the circle process. Now let's move on to the next one. It's listed in the Code of Conduct as a collaborative negotiation. You call it restorative conversations. Can you talk about that a little more?
And again, the example that I just gave about the child who got up to sharpen the pencil. So it's very quick little conversations that a teacher might have directly with a student if the student is not doing what they're supposed to do. For example, if I wasn't doing my work in class and I had my head down, you know, the teacher might just come up to me and say, Jeannie, what's going on? You know, and she'd say it quietly, not in front of the whole class, you know, and whatever the kid says, you know. But so, you know, how do you think that affects me when you don't do your work? And if the student has an answer, great, you know, they can work off the app, but if they don't, then the teacher can say, you know, that really affects me because I want everyone to do well, and I put a lot of time into my lesson, and when you have your head down, that gives me the message that either you're not interested or you don't care or that my lesson is boring. You know, I need to know what's going on here. Can you help me with that? And can you hear what I'm saying, how that affects me? And so you have that little conversation. And so what will you be willing to do so that this won't happen tomorrow and we can both be in a better place with this? So it shouldn't take more than 2-3 minutes to have those quick little conversations. And that's what we call restorative conversations. We have the questions on cards. We give them to teachers so that they can keep them with them or put them on their bulletin board. And eventually you get comfortable, you know, asking those questions.
Sometimes I was in the classroom for many years, and when I see something like that, and I would ask a question, very often the conversation would start out as you suggest, and sometimes they're angry. Sometimes I can't resolve it in a couple of minutes.
Absolutely.
That's what I think many teachers face, even those who are trained in this. It's you would when we were off camera, you said this takes practice to do it well.
And if you realize that there are other things going on, if you ask that question, what's happened to you. You know, you expand that and more things are going on. Well, that's why you have support staff in schools too. You know, counselors, social workers, et cetera, who are going to be there to help. And that's the teacher's role then, to make sure that they get connected.
Okay. Restorative conversations. The next thing on the list is peer mediation.
Oh, that's my favorite. Well, for 15 years, I oversaw a peer mediation program when I was at Monroe Middle School.
So tell us what it is.
Yeah, it's when there's, it's usually just two disputants. It can be more though, but mostly it's just two, and it's a very equal conflict. It's not for a bullying situation where there is someone that has less power. But they're both contributing to the conflict, and it could be, and from having done this for so many years, often it's about perception. Differences in perception, where you're thinking one thing has happened, someone else is thinking something else has happened. So we train students in this peer mediation model, and they actually sit with the students who are having the conflict, and in their own way, they're really asking those restorative questions. So can you tell us what, from your point of view, what's been happening? But they'll summarize, they'll paraphrase, they'll make sure that the other side understands very clearly what the first person is feeling is happening. You'll ask them how they're feeling about what's happened. You do the same exact thing on the other side. If whatever they have in common, you want them to understand that even if it's both the feelings that they're sharing are anger. So that is one thing that you're having in common right now, that you're both pretty upset by what's been happening. So what would you like to see happen to solve this? And again, you know, they help them go back and forth, and eventually they come up with a written agreement that gets signed. And for the most part, in schools where we've been doing this, it's really been a huge piece of their discipline program. And students are helping other students. But in a school that has the kind of climate where we're all in this together kind of thing, you also want to train a smaller group of adults, because then if a student and an adult have a conflict, you use an adult mediator and a student mediator to make it really pure mediation. And sometimes in the building I worked in, adults get in conflicts, and the principal would say, you know, they're willing, it's a voluntary process, but they're willing to go to mediation, and we would use two adult mediators then to help them resolve their issues. So I think it is a wonderful tool, and it does fall under the restorative umbrella. It wasn't always thought that it fit there, but it's a very collaborative approach, and hopefully you get the disputants to come to a place where they really are collaborating and not just compromising, where each one gives up something, but each one is gaining what they're going to need to move forward with each other. And because they have a signed agreement, and you do a check-in like a week later to see how things are going, you can have a very, very high success rate with this. So it's a great tool.
I took a look at this in action when I went to the Boys Academy, where they were doing something like that. And they reported that it was very successful there as well. The last thing on our list, formal restorative conference. Tell us about that.
So that would be when there is more serious wrongdoing, and we did talk a little bit about that in the last segment. It does take practice, but it also requires a lot of pre-conferencing. So there are some people working in the city school district right now who are very comfortable doing this, but it's a small number. But that's why organizations like ours, we train people in the community who are volunteer facilitators, who are willing to go into schools and do some of these more serious conferences. We've also trained all of the people that work for FACET, which is the civilian arm of the police department. And there are many of the school resource officers have been trained in this model too, and could facilitate a conference as well. So it does require a lot of prep, but when you really bring people together, it can be an amazing process where families who have been really at odds with each other for a while, they're exchanging phone numbers with each other. It also has a formal written agreement with someone who takes responsibility for overseeing the agreement, and typically that's a school administrator if it's done in a school setting.
Okay, we're about out of time in this
Okay.
segment. We just found out that we're going to do this again next episode. But in the meantime, can you tell us if people want to get in contact with you or learn more about this, who should they talk to?
So our organization is called Partners in Restorative Initiatives. We're housed on Hillside Avenue next to number 1 school. Our phone number is 473-0970.
Website?
And it's www.PIRI, which is our organization, PIRI, Rochester.org.
Okay, we'll be running that under your screen. Well, I thank you very much for talking to us this time. Next time we'll be talking about its applications in East High School and also about a new plan. It's pretty exciting that I had not known about. Please come back and find out more about that. I want to thank Jeanne Carlivati of Partners in Restorative Initiatives for coming this week.
Thank you
talk
again.
To you next.
Thank you,
Thank
Jim.
you for coming here, and see you next week.
Let's go!